on our hockey side, Erik Erlendsson, lightninginsider.com. People want to ask me to ask you about the spoons in the background. What's the deal with the spoons?
So it's my wife's collection. They're souvenir spoons, right? Like you go to
I didn't even know that
places.
was a thing.
Oh yeah, it's you go to souvenir shops where you're traveling, and they have these little souvenir spoons. So when I was traveling with the team, working for the Tribune, I would pick up these spoons, and we've got them from Niagara Falls, and we were in Iceland a couple years ago. We picked up some souvenir spoons, and so those are the display. And I'm gonna lift the camera up just a little bit. The one at the top right there.
Oh wow,
that is in the shape of Prince Edward Island.
Oh,
so
okay.
We found that one. I did a trip up to PEI to do a story on Brad Richards, 2007-ish, somewhere around there, and so we found that at a little craft show up in PEI that year. So we have added that to our collection too. So you'll be shocked to know this too, Jay. One of them was actually knocked off the wall by the boys when parents weren't home.
Wow.
At one point. So
color me not surprised. I remember being at my buddy Rob's house, and you got a chance to meet my buddy Rob years ago, and his mom had Hummels, like the little Hummel statues. Mm-hmm. And they're like this big, and they gotta weigh like 20 pounds. And we were playing ball in the house one time, and that thing came down right on my head. And that explains why everything is wrong with me between the ears. That explains it. Lightning start out the road trip with a nice win there in Vancouver. Brayden Point, second star, I think was it of the week in the NHL. He was involved in all four goals yesterday, and it just shows when he's in there, Double E. He's just such a dynamic player, and he really is one of the big straws that stirs the drink for this Bolts team.
He is, he's really an underrated superstar in a lot of ways, because he gets overshadowed by his teammates in a lot of ways. Obviously, Nikita Kucherov, when Steven Stamkos was here, Victor Hedman, Andrei Vasilevsky. But look, when he was named as one of the first six to the Four Nations roster for Team Canada, that kind of showed you what Jon Cooper thinks of him, but also what Team Canada sees in Brayden Point, because he doesn't get the recognition, but you just watch him play. And like even the empty net goal he scored yesterday, the speed that he showed, the understanding to take the puck off the stick of Elias Pettersson and just race up around up to the sideboards and kind of go in unopposed and score a backhander goal. He's just such a smart player. He's so unassuming. He's so humble. Like anytime you try and ask him about himself, he's never going to talk about himself. Ever. He's always going to defer to the guys he plays with. And that's some part of, hockey players are that's sort of in their DNA and who they are. But with him, it's just true. He's just a humble guy. You wouldn't know he's a 50-goal scorer in this league. You wouldn't know that he's leading the league in power play goals so far here in the early year. And that's after missing a handful of games like he did. He's the straw that stirs the drink is probably a good way to do it. We know that everything runs through Nikita Kucherov, but everything runs because of Brayden Point.
I want to ask you before we talk of the Lightning some more of the Four Nations. You and I have been looking for the last couple of weeks at people that would predict what the rosters are going to be like, and it was always the 12 best forwards and the 6 best defensemen. It was always like just look at the points. But you brought it to my attention early on, probably 2 or 3 weeks before it happened. Like, hey, watch out for Anthony Cirelli and Brandon Hagel making this roster. What gave you that impression that those two guys were going to be on there? And I would say, are you surprised that they made it? I guess not, because you saw it coming, but go into that decision for Jon Cooper. How much of that had to do with him, like being their coach for the Lightning, and how much of it has to do with like, hey, you need third and fourth line players?
Yeah, well, certainly there's a good advocate in the coach's office for both those guys, right? And they have such a good chemistry. We've talked about that. We've written about that. We've asked Jon Cooper about it quite a bit, especially this year in particular. But, you go back to the movie Miracle, right? The 1980 U.S. Olympic hockey team, and the beginning of the movie and the process of Herb Brooks, a legendary Hall of Fame coach, trying to put his best team together. And he gets questioned by USA Hockey officials. Well, this is a better player. This is a better player. And he said, I'm not looking for the best players. I'm looking for the best team. And that's kind of the mentality. And, when we asked Jon Cooper the other day, about a week and a half ago, almost 2 weeks ago, as we were getting close to the announcement of this, we asked about Cirelli in particular. And he said, look, you can't just take the top 12 goal scorers that are Canadian and put them on a team together. You need guys who can be on a power play. You need guys who can kill a penalty. You need guys who can be on a 6-on-5, who can be on a 5-on-6. So, you hear the head coach talk about that. Of course, Jon Cooper is going to be the head coach of Team Canada, and you get a little insight into his thought process. And, you start to put those pieces together. And look, those two guys, Cirelli and Hagel, I'm not surprised. Certainly it's Cirelli, because we know how good of a defensive forward he is, and some of the matchups he's probably going to get in these games. He's probably going to be the first guy over the boards to kill a penalty. And, and Hagel's maybe a little bit more of a surprise. But then you look at his offensive numbers. He's had such a great start to the season. And so you put those two together in what is essentially a short tournament. There's not really going to be a ton of practice time, so you have those two together. They have instant chemistry. They know how to work with each other.
They're killing penalties together, right? I mean,
absolutely. They're the first
doubt
two over the board. There's no doubt about it that those two are going to be the first forwards over to kill penalties. So that's the thought process that I think a lot of national teams have nowadays. Like, you can't just take, Jason Robertson's not on Team USA. Like, how is Jason Robertson not on Team USA? Well, they chose guys like Brock Nelson who can maybe kill some penalties, and, guys like that. So it's just the thought process. And, it's great for Brandon Hagel. I even asked him real quick before we were done the other night. I said, are you ready to be a Team Canada player heading through Canada and handling the media up there? And he just kind of laughed. He goes, yeah. Because he's probably the surprise name that maybe people weren't expecting to be there. But again, he has that advocate in Jon Cooper down the hallway, and he has that great chemistry with Anthony Cirelli. And it's going to be a very lightning feel to Team Canada, because Brayden Point's on there too. Jon Cooper's behind the bench, and Julien Brisebois was part of the management team.
How much pressure? I was just thinking about that. How much pressure is on Jon Cooper here? Like, a
lot.
I could see this. Like, let's say Team USA wins, right? And they beat Canada. Like, people are going to be pissed at Cooper, and they're going to say, how could you, we could have had this guy, but instead you want to bring three of your guys. Like, I was just starting to think about that. Like, all the pressure on this tournament has got to be on Canada, right? Even though
always.
You and I both agree. I mean, it always is. But, you look at their roster. Defensively, I just remember years ago, you look at the defensemen, you're like, that's literally the 5 best defensemen in the league. And, oh, my God, they have 3 of the best. They have the 3 best goalies. You could argue that as far as the roster, maybe up front, you have McKinnon, you have McDavid, you have Brayden Point, you have some incredible players there, Crosby. But when you look at the back end, you look at the goaltending position, I think this has been the weakest it's been maybe in the last couple of decades. Yep. But that's not going to change the pressure that Jon Cooper is going to be under for this tournament.
No, anytime you're representing Canada, and, the first couple of games of the Four Nations is going to be in Montreal. So he's going to be on Canadian soil. So yeah, there's absolutely pressure. And yeah, if he doesn't win, of course there's going to be questions. Like, why did you take this guy? Why did you take that guy? But at the end of the day, Canada's not the strongest roster in this Four Nations face-off. They're just not. I think you have to look at the USA roster and say they're probably the favorites, right? You look at some of the players that they left off. I just mentioned Jason Robertson, who's a 100-point guy that's not on this roster. Cole Caulfield is not on this roster, right? There's some really good players that they left off. They have the best goaltending, between Ottinger, Hellebuck, and Jeremy Swayman. Yeah. That's a pretty good trio to have. And one of those guys isn't even going to probably see any playing time in this. So, but we know firsthand the potential political fallout when one of your NHL guys is in charge of helping put together a roster, as Steve Yzerman did for the 2014 Olympic team for Canada, and Marty St. Louis was left off of it. We all know what happened, and Marty eventually landed on that roster, but it didn't change some of the hard feelings that he had towards Steve Yzerman at that time. So it's there's pressure, there's no doubt, and with the Olympics just a little over a year away as well, because Jon Cooper will be the head coach of the scheduled to be the head coach of the Olympic team too. So yeah, there's a ton of pressure on Canada anytime you put that jersey on, especially when it's a best on best tournament.
Yeah, I can't wait for it. It's going to be just amazing to see how that whole thing shakes out. Especially because Team USA. I mean, see the Kachuk brothers out there with Austin Matthews and Jake Gensel. Where does he fit in? Because I think he's one of those guys, and we saw it again yesterday. Like he is a guy that I love watching Jake Gensel play. Like he just always does the right thing. He's always in the right spot. He can legit play with the best players in the world. Um, I feel like for a long time there was a bunch of different guys that played with Crosby, and you wondered like how good could they really be? I mean, you saw Chris Kunitz with a final salvo of his career here in Tampa Bay as a fourth line guy. Wasn't the same, but Gensel, man, just his puck retrieval skills, the way that he can just do a little bit of everything. Like we see great stuff with the Lightning. I wouldn't be surprised if he was on that first line with a Kachuk and a Matthews, right? Like he is the guy that would you be surprised if he was the guy that was, scoring the game winning goal for Team USA? Because I wouldn't be.
No, he's a clutch goal scorer. I mean,
Yeah.
he's proven that in his career with the Penguins, and he had a pretty good offensive run with Carolina last year after the trade. So he knows how to score it. You mentioned he always does the right thing. He just has a knack for finding open ice, right? And that's a skill. That is a
It
skill to
is.
find
Mhm.
open ice, especially when you're playing with players like Sidney Crosby, with Nikita Kucherov, and understanding maybe how they think the game a little bit, and understanding where to be so that they can find you and they can find your stick. I mean, the goal last night, a little fortunate bounce for sure, but he's in the right spot at the right place at the right time. And Nikita Kucherov found him, although, look, the puck was batted out of the air by Noah Juleson winning off against him. But if he's not there, then that doesn't happen, right? So he just knows how to get to areas of the ice, and doesn't really put himself in bad spots defensively too often. And just, again, a smart player who's, his at the end of the year, we're going to look at his offensive production. They're probably going to be close to what we're used to seeing from Steven
Mhm.
Stamkos. So you're not losing a drop off in terms of offensive production when you bring him in, and he's been a perfect fit for Point and Kucherov, and makes them one of the most dangerous lines in the league.
Yeah, and listen, watching this team play, it's a good start. You know what's going on for the rest of the week as they travel to Edmonton and then Calgary and then Seattle before they return home on the 17th. What do we know as far as the injury updates? It just seems like guys are going
Mhm.
down left and right,
Yeah.
even if it's not for a long time, but it's just like getting banged up. It's that time of year, isn't it?
Yeah, if anybody's ever seen the movie Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome with
Hmm.
Mel Gibson, and Tina Turner was actually in that. There was a famous line, when you enter Thunderdome, two men enter, one man leave.
Hmm.
Well, for the Lightning yesterday, it was two men enter, three men leave, because the injuries caught him again. And, Jon Cooper made the comment before the game that we'll finally be healthy enough to have a full lineup. And Anthony Cirelli didn't make it out of the first period. He took a hit from Juleson along the boards. I don't know if it was ribs, hip. It's somewhere in that area that kind of took the brunt along that
Yeah.
edge right there on the bench, and he did not return. Erik Chernak took one shift to start the third period, did not play the rest of the third period. Connor Geeky only took one shift in the third period. He was out there. I think he stayed on the bench and tried to play. Actually, his one shift came in the middle part of the period, but he didn't play after that. And sometimes these are precautionary, but we won't know. The team is scheduled to be on the ice here in about 45 minutes in Edmonton. So maybe we can get an update on whether those guys are practicing or not. But we'll have to keep an eye on the transaction wire too to see if they have, because I think they're going to have to bring up somebody no matter what. Because if there's question marks, if they're game time decisions, these guys are going to be true game time decisions tomorrow
Right.
night in Edmonton. But yeah, look, everybody has to go through injuries. We've already seen it. Brayden Point missed some time. Nikita Kucherov missed a couple of games. Mitchell Chaffee came back last night as well. He missed a few games.
Nick Paul. Yeah.
It's Nick Paul missed a couple of weeks as well. He's back. Every team goes through it. You have to deal with it. But it just feels like it's kind of all happening here in the last couple of weeks. And maybe for these guys in February they'll get their rest that aren't going to the Four Nations.
Eric, so give me a name or two that could get called up.
Well, obviously Connor Sheary.
Yeah.
He was the guy who was called up last week when Nikita Kucherov was out and they didn't have enough healthy forwards. So he was the guy that came up and played a game. Dylan Dukes had a good start to this year, but I don't think he's in a position to be ready. They got some things that they still want him to work on. His numbers look pretty good. Geez, Gonsalves is still here. There's not a ton. Maybe Max Groshev. He had a really good training camp. He was one of the last guys that were sent down. He's had a pretty decent start for the crunch. So if you're going to look in that direction, the good news is you still have Cam Atkinson here. You still have Nick Perbix. They were both scratches last night. So if one of those injured players is available to play, then you can go with an 11-7 if you have to, depending on who's healthy or not. But not a ton down in Syracuse that you can call on right now. They're still banged up. Jack Finley still hasn't returned. Gabriel Fortier is a guy maybe too. He missed all the training camp, and he finally returned to action a few weeks ago. So he's been down in Syracuse. He's got some NHL experience under him, so Fortier could be an option as well.
We're starting to see some movement. I mean, we saw whether it was coaches or players, Jacob Trouba getting traded to the Ducks. That whole dumpster fire, what was going on? Get traded. You better leave now, boy. I also saw some people wondering if like Capo Caco was an option for the Lightning. I don't know if that was just something just thrown out there, but in what capability would the Lightning have the opportunity to be active as we get closer to the trade deadline, based on obviously what their salary cap restraints are and like other players out there?
Well, first of all, the Trouba situation, the Lightning did that a number of years ago with Dan Boyle, right? Like I remember talking specifically, I mean, Boyle was threatened as well. He said, accept this trade or we're waiving you and you're going to go to a last place team. Was what they told him, and he was not happy. He had just signed an extension. I'll never forget that conversation with Dan Boyle. Actually happened on July 4th of that year. So there's been precedent of these situations happening. Of course, this was in the summer. Jacob Trouba's situation is in season, so it was curious to kind of see that and how that affects the Rangers locker room. As far as Kakko, look, there's no doubt the Rangers are open for business. They're going through some difficult times. They just signed Shesterkin to the big contract, so they got some salary cap space they have to kind of think about moving forward. And the thing with, people are trying to connect the dots. Is there a chance the Lightning could have interest in Capo Caco? Well, look at his salary cap hit. What is, I think, $2.5 million this year. He's a restricted free agent at the end of the year. Why do you not have cap room? It has to be dollar in, dollar out if you're even going to think about that. And I guess the rumor that was flying around that somebody tagged me on last night was 3 draft picks in 2025. Well, that's just not going to happen. They just don't have the cap space for something like that. So, but the good news is that the Lightning are not an LTI, so they don't have to tap into a long-term injury relief pool as they have the past few seasons. They have actual cap space. It'll accumulate more and more as the season goes on. That's kind of how the salary cap works in the NHL. I think I saw last night that their cap deadline cap space is probably around $3.5 million right now. That can change depending on injuries and what you have to use. So there's a little bit more wiggle room this year for Tampa Bay than maybe there has been in the past couple of years when it comes to it. But one thing we know, if this team is in position when we get to February, there's no doubt that Julien BriseBois will do what he can to make a move to try and improve this team. He's proven in the past, and he's got a couple of second-round picks this year. One of them they picked up in the summer at the draft. So, he's got a little bit more to work with in terms of assets as well. So, I would anticipate if they're in the race, and I expect them to be in the race, that Julien BriseBois will be as active as he can be given the constraints that they have.
He spends 365 days trying to improve that Tampa Bay Lightning roster. He said that to you and me on multiple occasions. LightningInsider.com, Erik Erlendsson, Erik_Erlendsson. That's a K, not a C, 2 S's after the day. Sign up for LightningInsider.com today. Double E, appreciate you, brother. Have a great rest of your week. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Hey, that JNZ code is still active, by the way.
Keep it going, baby. JNZ, man. Throwback code.
JNZ, it's still active on the site. So anybody that signs up, watches the podcast here with Jay, $10 off every year, not just year one, every year. So JNZ, when you sign up, $10 off every year of your subscription.
That's awesome, buddy. Thanks, pal. Talk soon.
All right, bud. See you later.
See ya.